Fear Zone, your horror channel. Good evening, everyone, and now let's get to today's story, which is about young Tulio, and it happened to him in the city of Jacobina, which is in the state of Bahia. At that time, it was the year 2008. Young Tulio was just a teenager. And it all starts like this. I live in a very simple village in my city, but apart from that, what happened was that a friend of mine from the neighborhood, who was also a teenager, called me to catch some armadillos in an area far from where we lived. I only accepted this invitation because he sold these game animals to an old man who paid well and the money we shared. I took my flashlight because I knew that we would be hunting armadillos until late at night, so my friend arrived at my house, and we immediately went into the forest to catch the animals, and we walked on foot through the dirt roads. We walked for about an hour to get to the place. Well, there were a lot of armadillos in that vegetation. We started hunting these animals in their burrows, and the hours went by, but they didn't care about the darkness, and all we could think about was the money we wanted to get for those animals. But when it got to about 11 o'clock at night, we had already caught 4 armadillos, so we decided to leave that place, which was very dark, as the batteries in the flashlight were already running low. So we grabbed our things, and as we were walking along a path through the vegetation on the side of a farm, where there was a barbed wire fence, while we were walking there, we started to hear some voices from afar, like someone or an animal was calling, but we didn't pay any attention to that, and we carried on walking. But as soon as we walked a little further, we heard the sound of something running in the woods, and that scared us, so we turned off the flashlight and ducked through the vegetation after hearing a few pops of something in the undergrowth. It stopped running, and through the bushes, my friend saw the shape of something. I looked to see what it was, and I was startled, and even though the place was dark, I could see that the shape was that of a large animal, but what was striking were the lights in its eyes, which looked demonic. This creature seemed to suspect that we were hidden by the darkness, and it began to walk close to us, and it was frightening, because this beast was breathing deeply and quickly, and it was very frightening. It was at this point that the creature seemed to get closer to us, and it was sure to find us. My friend took a chance and threw the armadillo we had caught to the other side of the bush, but it didn't go after our game, and it crouched down in the vegetation and stayed there quietly without making a sound. For sure this beast was at least 15 meters away from us. In that moment of danger that we were in, we began to hear the voices of some people from the farm next door saying, "He could be here." Then we saw that this strange animal became afraid of those voices and disappeared into the darkness. And as that strange animal left the area, and we didn't see him again, we took advantage of that and went under the barbed wire fence of that farm and entered the property, and our intention was to see if there was anyone there to help us get out of that situation. The fact is, we walked through a huge cassava plantation and kept quiet, so as not to attract anyone's attention, until we got close to the backyard of the house in that place, and I saw 2 men armed with rifles, and the way they looked, they seemed to be looking for that bug. But my friend suspected something, and told us not to go and ask those rednecks for help, because we didn't know what was going on, and those men didn't seem to have good intentions. But also, we couldn't leave that place, because the creature we saw could be somewhere hidden, and we'd run the risk of being attacked by it. After about 15 minutes had passed, and we were hiding there in the manioc plantation, a strange thing happened, because the beast that was in the undergrowth behind us was inside the yard of that farm. I walked slowly close to those 2 armed men. He kept throwing something for the beast to eat, but out of nowhere that animal started growling at those rednecks, and they kept pointing the gun in the creature's direction, and it looked like they were playing with the beast. Then we got the biggest surprise of the night. This creature, which looked like a monkey and a dog, stood up like a man, balancing on 2 legs, and at the time I thought it was a werewolf. But the creature got back on 4 legs after the landowner stopped pointing the gun at it, and the most impressive thing was that another man opened the door of a small barn on the farm. And this werewolf went inside the barn, passed close to the guys and didn't attack them, and it seemed that the werewolf knew these people. With all this bizarreness, my friend and I turned back and ran away from that macabre place, and we walked hidden through the dark vegetation. As soon as we had walked for a few minutes, we arrived at a nearby village, and the worst thing was that it was already dawn and no one was around to help us. Well, at least we were calmer, and we decided to stay in that neighborhood until dawn, because to get to my house we'd have to cross other dirt roads. Of course, we weren't going to take any more chances. But apart from that, it's a good thing that it was day, and some people had already started to leave their homes, and the buses were circulating in the streets, so we took a bus and went back to our neighborhood, and as soon as I arrived at my house, I got a big scolding from my parents for having spent the night out. And what I did was tell him the truth, what happened to me, that I had to escape from a werewolf. The thing is, I didn't know what to do about the creature I saw on the farm, because it seemed that this creature knew those people. After that day, I never went armadillo hunting at night, because I know that these strange beings can be hiding in these dark and isolated places, and waiting for their victims. Well, after that encounter with the werewolf, I warned my acquaintances not to go near that ranch at night, and over the course of a few months, I learned that the ranch belonged to a wealthy family, where 2 or 3 times a year they spent time at the ranch, and then they didn't show up for months, and this story of these people had something to do with the werewolf. Perhaps this mystery I'll never know. Thank you for watching the video, and if you liked the story, please like it and subscribe to our channel to receive new videos every week. Until next time. Fear Zone, your channel for horror stories. And today's story is from Mr. Andre, who is from the city of Alfenas, which is in Brazil, and this event was in the year 2007, when Mr. Andre was 43 years old. Well, and to begin the story, I was working as a bus driver at that time, and was on the night shift. One day, I had already finished my shift, and I was already returning with the vehicle to the garage of the company. This early this morning, I left the collector who worked with me in his neighborhood, which was in a rural area. Anyway, on a dirt road, the bus that I was driving started giving problems and stopped suddenly, so I called my company to send the maintenance people to help me. Well, the attendant told me that the maintenance mechanic was already in another occurrence, and that I would have to wait. But the biggest problem was that the place I stopped was in a rural area, with a road that had little lighting and was dark, with a scary landscape, and on this dirt road, there were practically no cars passing. Although it was a scary place, I really wanted to deliver the bus and get home fast, so I decided to get off the vehicle and try to see if I could fix the engine problem myself, and I got off the bus with the flashlight in my hand and kept on working on the engine. I looked around the place and could only see the lights of a neighborhood miles ahead. But time went by, and it was almost 3 o'clock in the morning. While I was trying to fix the engine of the bus, suddenly, I started to hear some footsteps in the middle of the bush, close to where I was, and it was so quiet there that I could hear something walking in the middle of the dark bush. I was already scared of this place. Now with these noises, I got scared and got inside the bus to see what it was that was walking through the woods. I also turned off all the lights of the vehicle to make it more difficult for someone to know where I was hiding. I squatted down on a bench and kept looking at the roads and in the bushes through the glass window, either on the side, front, or back of the bus, because it could be a jaguar or some other dangerous animal, but I could not see anything. While I was trying to see something in the bushes, I started to hear a noise of something running, and it seemed like there was something walking around the bus, so I changed the window, and then I went to see what it was, and when I looked, I saw a big animal that looked like a dog, but very big. I couldn't tell what animal it was, but the coat of that animal, it was black and matted. Then I was really surprised, because I still had not been able to know what it was, and I also had not seen the face of that animal right. Then I went to another window to get a better look at that beast, to know what that animal was, and I got a better look at the creature, and I saw its face and got a big fright, and I was amazed at the face of that animal, which was very similar to the face of a man, but its eyes were very red, and lit like lights, and its ears were very big and pointed, and its jaw was like a dog's. That creature was really a freak. I was shocked and frightened to see this, because it looked like a supernatural animal. But while I was watching this creature, this beast also saw me at the window of the vehicle, and it was staring at me in a strange way, and it was a look that told me that it was going to get me, and with the fright that I got, I quickly crouched down in the bus, and hid myself between the seats, and I got very scared at that time, and went to the back of the bus. But the animal still circled the bus outside, and growled to scare me, and then went to the back door of the bus, and sniffed around the outside with the intention of getting in the door. I grabbed my flashlight and threw the light on him, so I could scare him, and that was the worst thing I did, and I was surprised by the beast, because he got angry with the light, and stood up on 2 legs, and stood like a man, and growled at me in great anger. The werewolf's reaction was that he kept forcing his way through the door, but he didn't have the skills to open the door, so I ran to the other part of the bus, and crouched down. But while I was hiding, suddenly I started to hear some growls from the werewolf, and it sounded like he was in pain, so I thought, maybe someone caught this beast. So I took courage, and decided to see what was happening to that werewolf, and when I looked, I saw this creature rolling around on the floor, and he was moaning a lot. But on closer look, it seemed that this werewolf was coming back into human form, and soon this werewolf stood upright. He was already almost turned around, but the creature realized that I was watching him, and it ran off into the dark woods and disappeared. Then I kept looking into the darkness to see if I could see anything else strange out there. Time went by, and nothing happened, and soon the mechanic from the company arrived from a winch vehicle at the site, around 5 o'clock in the morning, and all this delay was because the mechanic was fixing another vehicle on the other side of town. Well, I was very worried about the mechanic, and I told him to get into the bus quickly so that he would not be surprised by the beast, and I told him what had happened to me that early morning. As I was scared at that moment, we decided to wait until daylight to be able to do the maintenance on the bus, and when the day dawned and we saw the first rays of sunlight, we got out of the bus and tried to fix the vehicle, and while we were fixing the engine, I saw a man coming out of the bush, and he started walking along the road. He passed us. I noticed that he was barefoot, with no shoes on his feet, but he was wearing pants and a clean shirt, and I thought it was strange the way this wanderer was, for he walked in a hurry, and he looked back and forth scared of something. I called out to him to warn him of the creature, but he didn't care for me, and so he disappeared down the road. After a while, a car appeared on the road, and the driver stopped his car next to me, and he asked if we saw someone in a red shirt passing by on the road. I said I did, but the guy drove away. This driver told me that he lives in a small farm nearby, and that a wanderer stole the clothes in his backyard, and now he was looking for this suspect. After this conversation, the driver left, and the mechanic and I had to take the towed bus back to the company, and so I went home. Days passed. I continued with my work, driving the bus through the streets of the city, but one night, when I was passing by a bus, on that dirt road where I saw the werewolf, I saw a man walking down that road alone. I stopped the vehicle to warn him of the creature, but this guy was kind of scared of what I said. I realized that it was that walker I saw on the road without shoes, the day I saw the werewolf. But he did not even want the free ride that I offered him. I began to wonder why he wanted to stay in that place, which had many woods and was isolated. After this conversation, I continued my journey, but with the passage of time, with everything that happened, the werewolf, this walker, for me he was the suspect of turning this creature, and certainly he turned werewolf and stole the clothes of the farmer, that this bumpkin was hunting the walker that day. For me that's what happened. Well, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Until the next story. Fear Zone channel. And now then, let's go to today's story. Well, my name is Valdo, and this story happened to me when I was 21 years old and was in the city of Santa Luzia, which is in Brazil, and this story happened in the year 2001. And today I will tell you about something terrifying, in which I spent the greatest terror with a creature that came to surround me. And to start the story, I lived on the outskirts of town, and one day, my cousin who lived on the other side of town came to my house to pick me up by car to go to a birthday party at his house, and then I got in the car and we went together to the party. It was still afternoon, but after about 30 minutes, we arrived at my cousin's residence. I stayed at the party and met some of my relatives too, and the hours passed, and soon it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, and with that, many of our relatives began to leave the party. I also warned my cousin that I would also leave at that time, because it was already too late for me. Anyway, my cousin agreed to take me to my house, and soon he started the car, and I said goodbye to some relatives, and then I took my way back to my residence by car along with my cousin. But while we were taking the streets, my cousin decided to cut some paths to get faster to my house. He then began to enter very dark places, where there were some dirt roads, where you could see many oxen and pastures there, because it was a rural area. But everything was quiet on that trip, until suddenly, the headlight of my cousin's car showed a strange thing, about 20 meters ahead on the dirt road, and my cousin stopped the car on the spot, because there was a very dark and very big animal, and it was pulling a calf that seemed to be dead, and this beast was trying to cross the road. But what happened was that the light from the headlight of the car confused that animal, and that creature ended up leaving that calf dead in the middle of the road, where we were passing with the car. But this strange animal that looked like a kind of dog, he ran into the bush that was next to the road and disappeared. We were frightened by this creature, because we didn't know what animal it was, and for sure it was a ferocious creature, and also at that time, we didn't know what to do, whether to take the calf off the road, or leave that poor animal there. However, my cousin drove a few more meters, and we got close to this calf, and taking a better look, we saw that the calf was still alive, but all hurt, and with this happening, we looked around the bush, and we didn't see any sign of that beast around. With this, my cousin decided to get out of the car, and so did I, because we had to get that calf and drag it to the side of the road, so that we could drive the car along the road, and also, so that that animal would not be run over by another car that passed by. But even so, we took the calf by the legs, and we were dragging this animal to the side of the road, and soon we heard a noise on the road, and we got scared, and decided to get back into the car, because we thought that this big black animal could be surrounding us and hiding. And when we were about to get back into the car, the creature came out from behind the car and attacked my cousin on the side of the road and bit the bar of my cousin's pants, and that creature began to pull him into the bush. At the time I took a fright, because it was a thing of surprise, this attack of this beast, because I never thought that this animal was hiding behind the car. At that moment of terror, while my cousin was being dragged by that enraged animal, I began to kick and punch this strange creature in the head, and soon the beast felt the blows and ended up releasing my cousin, and at that instant my cousin got up quickly from the ground, and we quickly got into the car, and that black creature that was very large came running and hit the car door, but to our luck the door was closed. Finally, my cousin started to start the car, but the creature, to our amazement, stood up and stood on 2 legs like a man, and that to my surprise, put his clawed hands on the car handle and managed to open the car door. But my cousin was quick and managed to close the door, and to me it was clear that this animal was a werewolf. But after this moment of terror, my cousin started the car, and getting out of that place, then I was looking at that werewolf, who was still standing for a little while there on the road, and that scary creature had a very bright glow coming from his eyes, which made it look more macabre. But after all this terror, I was more relieved that we had managed to escape from that werewolf. As soon as we arrived at my house, I asked my cousin to spend that dawn at my residence, because I had a bad feeling that something worse might happen if my cousin returned to his house, and he was afraid and stayed at my house. We spent the early hours of the morning talking about the werewolf event, and how this creature could even exist, that we had only heard of, and only seen in movies, and talked about the intelligence of this beast, that it hid behind the car, and attack us by surprise, and also that the werewolf opened the car door. But after that day, I went back to my normal life, but when I imagined that werewolf, and the scene of terror that I spent that day, already gave me fear, but it was only that too, because fortunately, the neighborhood where I lived had many houses and lampposts, and the streets were all paved, and I did not worry much with that creature, because hardly a werewolf would prowl around here. But surprisingly, one day, I met a street dweller from my neighborhood at the bar, and he was telling people that he saw, at a certain dawn, a creature that looked like a black dog, going through the garbage in a supermarket in my neighborhood, but he still claimed that this animal was standing, walking like a person, and the street dweller said that when he saw that creature, the beast was on its back, and as the beast couldn't see him, this walker left the place hiding, and for this reason. He only slept near the emergency room, because it was safer, because in my neighborhood, the creature that he saw could meet him at dawn, and that would be the end of him. But I kept thinking, how could I be wrong about this creature, because this werewolf can appear even in well-populated neighborhoods, and by the description that this homeless man spoke of the creature was the same description of the werewolf that attacked my cousin on the road, and also by the fact, if true the beggar, the werewolf stays in the woods at dawn, but also sometimes can get in very populated places, as neighborhood for example. Of course people took in jest what this homeless man said, but the fact is that I saw this creature. After a few days, I looked for this homeless man to hear something new about the creature, but he also did not see anything else at dawn. But what remained for me is that werewolves exist and are able to mount a clever attack, and that was my story. Before we go to the next horror story, if you liked the story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Fear Zone, your channel of haunted stories. Welcome to our channel, and let's go to another real horror story. And this happened to Mr. Leandro, and it was in the year 1993, when he was 37 years old. Well, I will not speak the name of the city, to protect the church where this case happened, but what I can tell you here is that this city is in the interior of the state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. And today I will speak what I spent with this creature, which was certainly a werewolf, but it all started like this. I lived on the street of the square of my neighborhood, which also had a Catholic church there, but so far so normal. But it happened that in a certain early morning, when I would sleep, and it was very cold at that time, I went to get a blanket in the backyard of my house, but I passed in front of the gate, and I saw a strange thing on the street, for there was a walker hiding behind the cars that were parked on the street of the square. I thought that scene was strange, and I kept looking all around to see from whom the beggar was hiding, and when I looked right at one of the trees in the square, I saw something looking at the beggar. At first I even thought it was another resident of the street, but it turns out that what was hiding behind the tree, I saw that it was an animal similar to a dog, but very large, and the eyes of that creature shone a lot, as if it were lights, and I was very afraid to see that strange animal, and I realized that the intention of that beast was to catch that street dweller. And seeing that the beast started to come towards the walker, I ended up opening the gate of my house. I called the beggar, making a gesture with my hands. I started to call him for him to hide in my house. But it happened that at that time, I don't know how, but that huge creature heard calling the street dweller, and he hid behind the cars in the square, and I didn't see him anymore. But when I realized that creature appeared behind a car near my house, but to my fright is that this beast came out from behind the vehicle, but he was standing like a man and looked at me, and I was standing there at the gate. At that moment the street beggar came running up to my gate, and he went inside my residence. But at that same moment, that creature that to me was a werewolf came running after the beggar to try to catch him. But as I managed to close the gate quickly and saved the man, at that, I heard this creature banging on my gate, but then he stopped with the noises at my gate. But to my surprise, when I looked up, I saw this creature jumping over the wall of my house. At this moment I was terrified, and with a fright, me and the walker, we ran through the iron gate of the corridor of my house. But it turns out that the werewolf managed to run after us. I don't know how, because when I went to close this small gate, which was in the corridor of my house, the beast managed to get his arm through the gate, and so I couldn't close the gate. But in this moment of danger, I started to force the gate from the inside, and the werewolf was forcing it from the outside in order to get in. But to my amazement, and quickly in this moment of terror, the walker grabbed a brick block that was in my backyard and started to hit the werewolf's arm, which was preventing us from closing the backyard gate. In all that desperation, the beggar gave several blows to the werewolf's arm. This creature roared in pain, and soon he took his arm from inside the gate, and then this werewolf began to run away roaring loudly inside my house. It was a terrifying moment, those cries of the creature, that even shook my house. At that time, the neighbor's dog started barking nonstop, and when I looked at the wall of the house, I saw the creature already jumping to the street and was certainly fleeing in pain. But of course I didn't trust that beast. I was smart and attentive at that moment. Even though I was scared to death, I managed to close the gate to the backyard corridor of the house to make it difficult for that werewolf to enter. At this, my wife woke up with the noises. I ended up explaining everything to her, what had happened, and why the werewolf was there inside our house. And also, I let this homeless man spend this night in my residence, because what we experienced that early that morning, I would not let him back to the street at that time, because for sure, that werewolf would end up with him on the street. However, we stayed there at home until dawn, but we were scared of that creature, and I was there looking out the window of the house to the street to see if that creature was still around. What surprised me is that I saw that werewolf still hiding in a dark place near the church of the square, and he was looking in the direction of my house. After some time, this werewolf ended up disappearing from that place, but we stayed there at home until dawn, but always alert with that creature. As soon as dawn broke, the beggar wanted to return to the street again, and this, I took advantage and asked the walker, where did that werewolf? This guy ended up telling me that I would not believe who turned this beast, and the homeless man ended up telling me and warning me that I would Sunday in Mass, then I would know who turned this creature. Well, I was intrigued by what the beggar said, that if I went to Mass on Sunday, I would know who turned this creature. After this conversation, this walker went away. Anyway, but arriving on Sunday, I arrived at the church there in the square, and was in the service looking at people to see if I saw someone that I could be that werewolf, but nothing was happening. I even looked at all the people of the place, and ficavo thinking about what the walker told me, that he knew who turned this creature. But after a while, the priest began to make the service supper. When he distributed the bread and wine to the people in line, I got in line too, and when the priest gave me a piece of bread, I noticed that one of his arms was bandaged under his cassock, and at this time, the priest kind of looked at me with scared eyes. I was also embarrassed, and of course for me the priest was the suspect of being the werewolf. At this time, then I lowered my head and went back to the church bench. Then I stood there looking at the priest and also at his arm, and started to notice that it wasn't just a simple band that was on his arm. I noticed that he moved his arms with great difficulty and seemed to be very hurt. The priest also started to look at me, gave a strange and suspicious look. Then, what the walker told me could be true, that in the mass, I would know who was that turned this werewolf. And besides all this, to make me more sure that it was the priest who turned werewolf, is that he was new in this church, where he replaced the old priest almost 2 months ago. After the service, I went back to my house. I kept looking in the direction of the church that night to try to see something more strange. I noticed that sometimes this priest would look in the direction of my house through the window of the parish, so I became more suspicious of him and thought to myself that any day this creature could be watching me and waiting for a moment of distraction from me to try to invade my house again. But a few days later, I saw the wanderer that ran away from the werewolf in the morning, and he was talking to the priest, and it didn't seem to be a friendly conversation between the two, because one was pointing his finger at the other, and the wanderer was cursing the priest, and at that moment, after that discussion between the two, I saw this street dweller walking in the square. I went to find out what he was talking about with the priest, and the homeless man told me that he knew that it was the priest who turned the werewolf, and that even some people in the neighborhood knew his secret, and that there were some people who were waiting for him to come back and get the werewolf. And the beggar also told me that he wouldn't sleep in this square anymore, because he didn't want to meet this creature again. So, I asked the street dweller if he knew anything more about this beast, or if he had seen this creature other times at dawn, and what the street dweller told me was that once in a neighboring city, he had a walking partner who walked with him, and his partner was even bitten by such a creature while they were walking through the streets at dawn, but they managed to escape from the werewolf, and that after some time of this attack, his partner started to get strange, and the dogs from the city streets always tried to attack him, and with this, after some time, he saw his partner turning into this creature, and after this day, he never met this street dweller again. But after this whole conversation with this homeless man, I was kind of hanging around and watching the neighborhood church to see if I saw any clues of the creature. But one day, I saw the priest leaving at night with a car, and then I watched well, and soon after he returned to the church very early in the morning, I saw that he held some iron chains in his hands, but the creature I saw no more. As time went by, and after a few months, this priest ended up leaving the neighborhood parish and disappeared from the city, and no one has heard from him since, and with this problem, the parish was some weeks without any priest to make mass in the neighborhood, but over time, everything was returning to normal, because soon another priest arrived in this parish, and the homeless people who had disappeared from the square began to return little by little there. But after this whole story, that I lived the experience with a werewolf, I don't know if that priest was really the one who turned this creature, but that I was attacked by a werewolf. This happened, and I give a warning to all of you, be very careful when you walk around at dawn, because you can see a creature like that in front of you, even in an urbanized neighborhood. Well folks, that was my real horror story, and if you like the story, give a like and subscribe to our channel. Fear Zone, your channel of haunted stories, and now then, let's go to today's story. Hello everybody, and today I am going to tell you what happened to me in the year 1997 when I was working in the region of the city of Piracicaba, which is in Brazil, and at that time I was 39 years old. And to start my horror story, I never thought in all my life that I would go through a situation like this, of meeting the werewolf at my worst moment. And to start my story, at that time many years ago, I worked in a sugar mill during the night hours, and this company was inside a large sugarcane field. I had an old car, which I used to go to work. One Friday, when I was working at the mill, a friend invited me to a party after work, and I accepted the invitation. So as soon as our work hours were over, my friend and I got in the car and drove to the party. However, The roads through the sugarcane fields were dirt and dark, and to my bad luck my car started giving problems and stopped on the dirt road. We waited for someone to pass by to help us, but after an hour, no one drove by on the road. With that, we started to fix the car, and at this moment, my friend and I saw something strange come out of the woods running, and that shape entered the middle of the sugarcane field. My colleague kept asking me what animal it was, because we got a big scare because of the size of that animal. We thought it might be a dangerous animal, so we decided to get inside the car to see what that animal was, or if it was still around. We kept an eye on the bushes and on the reed fields, but we didn't see anything else. But even so, we were pretty scared, however, seeing that that animal didn't appear anymore, so we got out of the car and tried to fix the car, and at that time, it was already past 1 o'clock in the morning, while we spent our time on that road, still scared of that animal that had crossed the street. But looking closer we saw that there was a house up ahead, so we pushed the car to the next house to ask for help, but we noticed that when we got closer, the lights in the house went out. We found this strange, and started to look inside this house to see what was happening, and we got a fright, because we saw a black figure circling the fence of that house. It was for sure that animal that we saw crossing the dirt road, and that entered the sugarcane field. And looking at that beast, I realized that it was a creature totally different from anything I had ever seen. It looked like a monkey, and like a dog too. It was an amazing thing to see, because it was bigger than a large dog. But soon, that creature stopped and started sniffing the air, and he started looking in the direction of my car, and for sure he realized our presence there, because that animal stood up, and stood on 2 legs, as if it were a person, and for us this creature was a werewolf, because he had red and lit eyes. Finally, this creature started to come walking towards us, and then he started to bang on our car window, and also this werewolf was trying to open the car door. In that moment of terror, we stayed there with a lot of fear, but I risked myself, and I managed to start the car a little, and began to honk the car horn, and it worked, because the werewolf was frightened with the noises, and this creature was on 4 legs and ran to the bushes near the house. At the time my friend and I were watching him, and that beast ducked into the woods hiding, but the eyes of that monster was so bright and lit that we could see when it was looking at the car. But the strange thing is that the werewolf stayed there in the woods for almost an hour, and it didn't want to leave the house, and we wondered what the werewolf wanted. But after some time, the werewolf disappeared from the place, and we didn't see it again. Even so, we decided to wait until dawn to try to fix the car, because at that time there were no cars passing by to help us, and it was a totally deserted and dark place. However, we were still very scared, but the hours went by, and when it got close to 4 o'clock in the morning, suddenly we started to hear the barking of dogs in the distance, and we got even more scared, and before long, to our surprise, we saw that werewolf again near the fence behind that house, where we were standing there in front. But this werewolf this time, he came into the backyard of the residence, and stood on only 2 legs, and he started sniffing the window. I think that was to sniff if there was someone who was there inside the house, but the strange thing is that this creature went to the front door of the residence that was already open, and he came inside the house. At that moment I thought, if there is anyone inside this house, they will be killed by this creature, and we stayed there without knowing what to do, but very worried, because there could be a family inside this residence. At this time of danger, my friend said, "There's no way, let's get a piece of wood on the fence, and fight with this creature." So, when we got out of the car, and grabbed some pieces of wood from the fence, but entered the backyard of the house, we heard some moaning noises, and it sounded like someone was rolling on the ground inside the house, but then we didn't hear any more noises in there. I thought it was strange that no one turned on the light, or screamed. As nothing was happening, we got back into the car, and kept watching, to see what that werewolf was going to do, But time went by and everything was quiet around, and soon the day began to dawn and the sun came up, and so, something happened. For me and the colleague, we saw an old man looking at us through the window of the house, and then he disappeared. We decided to ask the old man for some help. We called him, but the old man didn't come out to answer us, and it seemed that he was afraid of us. Well, a car passed by on the road, and so this driver stopped to help us. We tied a rope to both cars, and the driver managed to get us out of that deserted place, and I saw that the old man was hiding watching us, but we managed to get out of this place. Anyway, we stopped at a car mechanic, and I managed to solve the problem with my vehicle, and then I left for my home. So a few days passed, and for me, that old man of the house had some kind of connection with the werewolf, or maybe he transformed himself into this creature. However, now I know that these creatures exist and are violent. Anyway, with the forests and sugarcane fields that were near the company I worked for, I started to leave my job with the company's own bus. But today I am already retired, and that place where we saw the werewolf is already a small neighborhood, because the city has grown a lot in these last years. But after that night that I saw that creature, my whole concept about the hidden things that can exist in this world changed. And until today, I don't know the relationship that old man of the house had with the werewolf, because I don't know if he was the one who turned the beast, or if he hid and protected that creature in his house. This doubt I have until today. These days I passed in front of the werewolf's house, but found that the old man had left for another town. And you, what do you think about the relationship between the old man and the werewolf? Well, if you liked the story, like it and subscribe to the Fear Zone channel. Until the next horror story. Fear Zone, your horror channel. Good evening everyone, and now let's move on to today's story, which is about Mr. Thomas, and it happened to him in the city of Mazatlan, which is in Mexico, and at the time, which was in 2017, Mr. Thomas was 48 years old. And what I'm going to tell you here is my experience of a night when a dispute between creatures brought terror to my ranch, but I found out why it happened. But before I start my horror story, help the channel by giving your like. That's the only thing I expect from you. And now let's get to today's story, and it all starts like this. I live on a ranch, which is a place well away from the city, where I live a very quiet life with my family, but something happened in my life at a certain dawn that made me be very careful about the area where I live. Well, back to my story. What happened one day in the late hours of the night, I was sleeping normally, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the barking of my dogs, and the way these animals were nervous. It seemed that they wanted to attack something around my place. I wondered what was going on, and out of nowhere, I heard some kind of fighting growls, which would be some kind of animal confronting my dogs, and suddenly I heard the animals fighting fiercely, and I heard a lot of violent knocks on the fence of my farm. I got up from my bed quickly and went to look out of the kitchen window. When I looked through the crack in the kitchen window, I was startled to hear some noises in the bamboo fence again. My dogs just kept looking and barking at the fence, but then, and it was two creatures fighting, but apart from the fact that I was frightened by what was happening next to my ranch, I couldn't see what kind of animals were fighting, because the bamboo fence was high, and I couldn't see those animals fighting. But in the middle of that fight, suddenly, those two animals stopped fighting, but they kept growling very angrily, one wanting to attack the other, and then these two creatures stood up. And I couldn't believe what was happening, because these two beasts seemed to be standing behind my paddock, and you could see these two animals from the chest up, but I couldn't identify which animals they were, because the undergrowth next to my property was very dark at dawn, and these beings were looking at each other very angrily, and they kept looking at each other, and they were going to attack each other again. The fact is, I started to get scared, because while these two creatures were measuring each other, they were quickly looking around my yard, kind of looking for something, and then I saw that the eyes of these two creatures were shining like lights, and when I saw that, I got even more scared. Well, right after that, those two beasts attacked each other again, and started a fierce fight again, but the creature that seemed to be losing the fight ended up jumping over the wooden fence, and entered my yard. This animal fell anyway on the ground, but when he got up, he stood up like a man. Then I fell into reality that those strange animals were werewolves, and at that moment, the animal that was in my yard was still looking at the other werewolf that was behind the fence, and then he got on all fours and ran to the back of my ranch, and my dogs became afraid of these two creatures, and they barked from afar so as not to be attacked by the werewolves. After all this confusion, it was getting dangerous for these creatures to be on my ranch. I quickly went to get my gun, which was a .36 caliber revolver, and at that moment I heard my wife getting scared. She asked me what those strange animals were around our property. I told her not to panic, so as not to wake the children, and that we couldn't drive away from our house, because the car was at the back of the yard, and that one of those beasts was inside our property, and that she'd better keep quiet, because those creatures were very dangerous, but I didn't tell my wife what those animals really were. I had my gun in my hand and went to look out of the window again, and saw that there was only one of those creatures there, and I couldn't find another one who has been beaten. The werewolf that was outside the fence started to make strange sounds, as if it was calling and looking for another werewolf. I didn't understand this very well, and to my amazement, another werewolf came out of the backyard. But this one was different from the other two werewolves, because as well as having a lighter coat, this creature had a more delicate appearance, and to me, it could only be a female of these creatures, and for sure, those two werewolves were fighting over this female beast. The fact is that the werewolf that was on the fence calling this female, what he did was break some of the bamboo and wood on my fence so that this other female creature could pass by, and as soon as she did that, they met and started sniffing each other as if they were dating. Well, I was scared by the whole thing, but I didn't shoot those animals because they didn't mess with my family, so I let it go because soon they disappeared into the woods. Even so, I didn't trust these beasts, and soon I was watching around my house and thinking about fleeing by car, but I didn't know if another werewolf was still hiding somewhere on my land, waiting for me to come out and take me by surprise. Anyway, when daylight came, I left my house, and I kept thinking about these werewolves that were surrounding my ranch, and I was worried that these animals might appear again, and near my ranch, there were few neighbors around to help in case of such a risk. But what I did was to put my car near the door of my house, in case I could run away quickly if these animals came back. I told this story to my neighbor, who had several werewolves prowling around our neighborhood at dawn, so that he would be on the lookout. A day passed and those creatures didn't appear on my land again, and at least I had a revolver and a car to escape with if I had to confront them. However, after 2 days of this situation, a friend of mine called me at the gate of my farm, and he asked me for a favor, if I could drive his niece and her boyfriend to the bus station with my car, because they were going to return to their city. I agreed, because he gave me some money to do it, but as soon as I arrived at my friend's place, my friend's niece had a boyfriend and he was all bruised, and looked like he'd been bitten and scratched by some ferocious animal, and the boy said he'd been attacked by a large dog that had escaped from a house. So I took the couple to the bus station, and after I had finished that trip, I went back to my house, and I went on with my life almost normally, because I was still afraid of having another experience with these werewolves, and I was worried about these werewolves at night. After 2 weeks, I ran into the rancher who helped his niece, and this friend asked me if I had seen any werewolves in the neighborhood. I said that I had. After this conversation, I began to suspect this rancher. And it was then that I had a flash in my mind that the boyfriend of my acquaintance's niece, who I took to the bus station, I suspect was him, one of those werewolves who fought that night, and maybe my friend's niece was that female werewolf who appeared in my yard, and the other werewolf was also interested in the wolf woman, but I could also be wrong. And this acquaintance of mine, who asked me to take his niece out of town, this guy lives on a property far away from the city, even from the area where I live, and he's a very strange person who dabbles in black magic, and maybe he's behind the appearance of these werewolves. But here's the thing, at least the werewolves haven't appeared anymore. I'm still wary of these creatures, because the boy and the girl could be two werewolves, but what about the other creature that fought with him? I keep wondering who he could be, or where he went, or if he could still be in my town. And in this whole story, to this day I keep an eye on the ranch of that acquaintance of mine, because he never came to talk to me again. And what do you think of this story, if maybe the couple could be those werewolves? Thanks for watching my video. A warning for you, I need your likes on the video. That's the only way I'll be able to bring more unpublished stories to the channel. If you don't give a like, the views of the video drop and it harms the channel. So take your hand out of your pocket and give a like, okay?